I have successfully rented 4 apartments in Paris. So in this video, I will be sharing the price range in Paris as well as the suburbs, the difference between renting with an agency and a landlord, the process of finding an apartment, and more tips to save money on rent as a student. So Paris is divided into 20 arrondissements or neighborhood, and the first arrondissement is in the center of Paris and the rest rotate in a clockwise direction. Here you can also see an image of the average price per meter square according to the arrondissement in Paris. So you can see that the most expensive arrondissement is 4, 6 and 7, and the cheapest arrondissement is 13, 18 and 19th. But this is not to say that all the apartments in these arrondissements would be expensive or cheap, but this is just the average price or average of all the apartments in Paris. So you can either find an apartment through an agency or through a landlord. If you find an apartment through an agency, you know that the apartment is legit, but you will have to pay additional fees depending on agency to agency. And if you find an apartment directly through an individual, there's no additional fees, but you will have to make sure to see it's not a scam, and I'll mention more on this at the end of the video. So to apply to any place, you would need firstly proof of identity. So this can include your passport and your residence permit. Proof of resources. Firstly, in France, it's really hard to kick a tenant out, especially in the winter months, which is between November and February. And this is why most of the landlords are really picky with whom they pick as their tenant. So for the proof of resources, you would need your contract, last 3 months of your payslip, and last 3 months of your previous apartment's rent receipts. You would also need your job contract or your student contract if you're still a student, bank account details, tax returns to show your income, last 3 months of your payslip, which have to be 3 times of your rent, and a French guarantor. A guarantor is someone who vouches for you if you're unable to pay the rent for a specific month. If you're an international student who does not know any French person, then there are also several websites, which I will mention later, which will help you find a French guarantor on your own. And I also like to put a first page to briefly introduce myself, my work or my school, as well as I mentioned that I'm a non-smoker and that I do not own any pets. These are several qualities that will help you stand out from the other applicants. So in the universities and schools of France, you will not usually find dorm rooms or student residencies on campus itself, unlike the US. And that is why there are many student residencies here, and some of the popular ones are Les Creux, Studapart, and Cité Université. Now, these student residencies are not necessarily cheap. It can really depend from one another. Cité Université, for example, only accepts master's or PhD students, but on average it's between 450 to 1,000 euros. Cité Université, for example, only accepts students who are in France for master's or PhD, and their price range can also vary from 450 to 600 euros depending on single or shared rooms. Cité Université is a really interesting student residency because it has a huge campus of more than 14 different nationality houses. So there's a house for India, there's a house for Spain, US, etc. And they also celebrate all festivals together, such as Diwali and Holi. So this is a really good opportunity to live in such a student residency where you can celebrate different festivals and experience a lot of multicultural activities. So outside of student residencies, there are other studios or apartments that you can find using different platforms such as Seloger, PAP, which is called PAP, Fusac, and Le Bon Coin. Again, all of these links would be in the description box below. And I have personally found 2 apartments using Seloger, so I found the platform to be very useful and really easy. You can also live with a person, which is called colocation or room sharing in French. So there are several websites or groups for this. Some of them are Indians in Paris on Facebook or Accommodation in Paris. I will also link all of these groups down. Or if you're already in Paris, there are also several locations where there are a lot of advertisements put up for these kinds of room sharing. I personally found one of my room sharing apartment through an advertisement which was in front of the American church in Paris. So this is also a place where there are oftentimes many advertisements either for jobs or for apartments and studios. So now once you apply for a place online, they'll respond to you asking you to come for a group visit of the apartment. And during this group visit, you'll be with 20 to 25 people on average. And when the agent comes to show the apartment, it's really quick, hardly 10 minutes. And so make sure that you have your dossier, your application file ready, your questions ready, and don't forget to take photos and videos, because most likely you won't see the apartment again, even if you are chosen to be the tenant. Now let's talk about one of the main challenges when finding an apartment. As I mentioned before, you will need a French guarantor. So if you do not have one, there are platforms such as Visa and Guarantor that will help you find a guarantor. Now let's talk about some of the tips that every international student should know when they're trying to find an apartment in Paris. So the main tip for saving money on rent is by applying to CAF. So CAF is basically a financial support provided by the French government in order to help the international students with their rent. If you're in a studio, you can get up to 200 euros per month by the French government, and if you are in colocation, which is shared room, you can get 180 euros per month. Me personally, I was getting around 100 euros per month when I was living in a studio. Now let's talk about scams in Paris while finding an apartment. So Paris is very famous for having a lot of scams. The most famous scam, I would say, is potential landlords asking you to pay money or deposit upfront even without visiting the apartment. And they would give excuses such as they're too old to come to the city since they live outside the city, and so they can't come all the way to Paris to show you the apartment. So this is the most obvious scam, because you should never pay money upfront without visiting any apartment. And another famous scam would be an apartment that looks too good to be true. So after you do a bit of research on Loger and Le Bon Coin, the platforms that I already mentioned, you would have a general idea of what an apartment looks like given the price range. And this would be the best method to avoid these kinds of scams. But the general advice is to never pay money upfront without visiting any apartment. If you found this video helpful, subscribe to my channel and like this video for more content like this, and I'll see you in the next one.